ask to please, thank you. We will ask to please keep yourself muted in the main session unless you're invited to speak. There'll be plenty of opportunities for discussion in the Q&A session. If you are speaking, please switch on your camera. You're welcome to leave it on during the whole webinar if you want. You're also welcome to turn it off if it's too much for your bandwidth. And then, yeah, we encourage you to really use the chat box as much as possible to post questions, make comments, and introduce yourself. I think you all know where the chat box is now. But yeah, in case you don't, you can have a look, check it out. You'll find the interactive slides there already. And feel free to introduce yourself and your organization in the chat box. So I'll go ahead. My name is Melissa. I'm in the UK, and I work for SCADS Foundation, which hosts the Rural Water Supply Network. There we go. Yeah, please feel free to do so. Yeah, and as I said earlier in the session, please have a look at the deck of slides that Luz posted in the chat box, and you will find the profiles of other member organizations and partners of Aqua for All who might be attending this session today or who have attended previous learning and networking events. So now we'll move on to the session itself. So we have a main presentation from Thijs Merton on the topic of mobilizing investments for water and sanitation enterprises through carbon credits. We will have then 3 discussants, Christelle Kwizera from Water Access Rwanda, John Nyagwenchak from Aqua Kenya, and Guido van Hofwegen from Nazava Water Filters. This will be followed by a Q&A session. There will be also an optional networking element, and then we will wrap up. We have planned 1 hour for this session, but we may go slightly over if we see that there is interest in asking more questions, or yeah, there's a lot of interest in the topic. Let me briefly introduce RWSN. So we are the Rural Water Supply Network. We're a network of 14,000 individuals and more than 100 member organizations. We have a strong base in Sub-Saharan Africa. What we aim to do is to make linkages between practitioners in the rural water sector and other actors, so local government, national government, private sector, NGOs, researchers, training institutions in the rural water sector. We host a lot of webinars that are for all our members, but we also do dedicated events just for our member organizations. So yesterday we had a webinar which was for all members of RWSN, but this webinar is just for member organizations, and you will see on the slide where the member organizations are based, and those that have made this event possible by financially supporting us this year are also on the slide below. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Luz, who will present Aqua for All.
Hi, good morning. Just a quick introduction. My name is Luz. I work for Aqua for All and as a program officer, and I especially focus on climate. So Aqua for All is an international foundation, and that strives to create a sustainable and inclusive water and sanitation economy worldwide. We believe that innovations, scalable solutions, and access to capital are key to overcome the current delivery and finance gap. So Aqua for All tries to bridge these gaps by deploying funding in blended finance structures, especially targeting local WASH SMEs, but also financial institutions. Next slide, please, Melissa. And in our current program, Making Water Count, we support more than 100 project partners, which are mainly based in East Africa, the Horn of Africa, West Africa, and South Asia. And as you can see in the pie chart in the right top corner, we mainly support, or our project partners mainly work on drinking water, but also many are active in sanitation or do both sanitation and drinking water. And then there are a few that work on RWRM. And if you are interested, you can find out more about our project partners on our interactive map on our website. You can see the link in the slides, and you can find the link to the slides in the chat box. Yeah, that's it.
Great, thank you so much, Luz. So we'll get started with the session proper. So we'll hear from not only one, but two experts on carbon credits for the water and sanitation sector, Thijs and Astrid. And then we'll hear from Aqua for All partners and RWSN member organizations on their practical experience of using carbon credits. Afterwards, we'll have Q&A and perhaps also a networking element to close it off. So let me introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Thijs Merton from Fair Climate Fund India. He works on building carbon projects with FCF India across Africa, finding high potential projects, restructuring partnerships, negotiating finances, and getting projects off the ground. FCF India works in nature-based solutions, afforestation, reforestation, and household products such as cook stoves and water filters, as well as community treatment facilities. For FCF India, considering the significant impact of the wash sector on mitigating and adapting to climate change, carbon credits play a significant role in bridging the wash financing gap. Thijs has worked for Aqua for All for nearly 3 years in Ethiopia before venturing into the carbon space. So Thijs, over to you.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Let me share my screen for the presentation. There we go. You can see my screen, huh? Perfect. So from what I understood, preparing for this session, some of you also wanted some basic introduction into the carbon markets. Of course, different people will have different levels, but I think it's good to start with the basics so we're all kind of on the same page regarding carbon credits. So what is a carbon credit? A carbon credit is a quantification of an amount of CO2 that is either taken out of the environment or that is being prevented from being emitted. One carbon credit being 1 ton of CO2 taken out of the environment or being prevented from being emitted, either through reforestation, afforestation, through clean cooking, through safe water supply, preventing boiling, biogas, briquettes for clean cooking, compost, etc. So how does that work in practice? You always have your baseline situation where X amount of CO2 is being emitted. Then when you implement the project, let's give the example of household water treatment to prevent boiling, emissions are being reduced. That difference between additional emission reductions between the baseline and your project is what is being quantified in tons of CO2, 1 ton being a carbon credit and sold on the market. I think it's very important to make this distinction as well, because in practice, we see that there's a bit of confusion here. There's a difference between the compliance market and the voluntary market. The compliance market, for example, the European trading scheme, is a market in which certain actors that emit large amounts of CO2 have to trade emissions. There's a maximum of emission set that's put at, for example, at 800 tons. An organization that would emit 900 tons has to purchase the right to emit that extra 100 tons and pay another organization that is, for example, 100 tons under that 800 tons. And thereby, by lowering that maximum over time, emissions across the EU are being lowered. Now, the pricing of these credits is much higher than on the voluntary market. The compliance market recently broke 100 euros per ton. On the voluntary market, pricings of 10, 15, 20 euros per ton are much more common. The voluntary market is the market that is applicable for the audience today. It is those carbon credits that are bought on the market on a voluntary basis by mostly corporates as well as individuals who want to offset their own CO2 footprint. Now, there's different standards and for certifying a project. The most common ones are Verra and Gold Standard. I'm sure you've heard of these names. And under these standards, you have different methodologies under which you can certify carbon projects. So what is the cycle of a carbon project? How does a organization like FCF or any carbon project developer actually work? First, you would go into looking, where's the potential? source deals. You would find organizations that have a potential for certification. You would go into a pre-feasibility assessment, find if there's sufficient scale, find if there's sufficient capacity for adequate data management and monitoring, and build a preliminary business model that makes sense for both parties involved. You would go into an MOU if that pre-feasibility assessment is found to be good, finalize a business case, agree on some terms, either in revenue sharing from the income of carbon credits or a consultancy, whatever works for both parties. Then you would design a PDD, hand in a project design document under VARA or under gold standard that describe the project in broad terms. Either you invest in the project yourself, or you mobilize investors that pre-purchase credits and thereby inject capital into the project. So either a carbon project developer themselves has capital, has working capital to invest into these projects, or you would find corporates to invest into these projects. Then you would go to the validation and verification stage of a project. An auditor comes in to audit the project. You monitor offsets, you generate and communicate all the necessary data on carbon sequestration or carbon offsets, as well as other SDG impacts. Then as soon as the project is validated by a third-party auditor, you go into that monitoring stage and into a verification stage under which your project is actually certified. After a certification stage, you would go into your MRV stage, monitoring, reporting, verification, where you continuously monitor the CO2 reduction that is taking place. Credits are being issued, revenues are being divided according to the agreements that are being made, and the project continues running and continues to generate credits. So what are the critical parameters behind carbon credits and behind carbon projects? First of all, it's your start date. The start date in which your project starts realizing emission reductions. The commissioning date of a project, for example, conceptualized by an agreement that is being put into place. Your baseline is important. Like I said in an earlier slide, what happens in the baseline situation and what is the carbon emissions that are taking place in a baseline scenario. Then your additionality. Carbon credits always have to be additional to what is happening on the ground already. Additionality can be conceptualized as regulatory additionality. Is it additional to what the government is already doing, to what policy is in place? And financial additionality. Is the income from the carbon credits necessary in order to actually create the project? And carbon credits have to be necessary in order to create the project, and they have to be additional for the carbon credits to actually realize the carbon offsets for the carbon sequestration. A methodology is very important, that you have the right methodology under VARA, under gold standard, that will help you to produce a good baseline, to do proper monitoring, and to have a methodology that is applicable to your project and to your situation. Stakeholder engagement is extremely important in carbon project development of local communities, private sector, government, etc. And all groups and communities that are affected by the project have to be engaged. And this is also done through a local stakeholder consultation meeting, a big meeting that has to be done for every carbon project, where all relevant stakeholders are invited and get an explanation about the project, about the carbon credits, how it works, and the way forward for the project. Then SDG impacts are also very important. For gold standard, you are actually obliged to also report on 3 additional SDG impacts, be it, for example, on gender equality, SDG 5, be it on safe water, SDG 6, be it on decent work, SDG 8, and you have to very clearly also communicate the impact on these additional SDGs. So I also heard timeline is a very important one for a lot of people involved here. How long does it take to certify a carbon project? It differs per project. Of course, a reforestation project will take much longer than a clean cooking project, but generally, this is the kind of timeline you're looking at. Setting a project boundary, understanding the systems to be covered in the project, who are the stakeholders, opening an account for the project, selecting a proper methodology will set you back about 4 months. Doing a local stakeholder consultation meeting, generating all the data for the project listing, preparing the listing under a gold standard or Vera, getting that approved, an additional 3 months. Then you will do your baseline, you will make a database of all households who get, for example, a water filter, and produce all the data that is necessary for certification, and then validation will be done by an auditor. You finalize the project design if that audit is successful, and you submit all the documents and find closure of the project. Then you will go to registration for the project. You will get a review from, let's say, gold standard, get a response to all the findings, make sure that all the data that is being delivered is done accurately and scientifically correct, and you register the project, i.e. certify it. That process will last about 1.5 years. And then continuously, you of course monitor the usage of, let's say, your household water filter. And every year the project will be verified again in order to continue to generate credits. So what are the documents that you need to deliver if you want to properly certify for carbon credits? What are the things that as a project implementer or project proponent you need to have in place to successfully certify? You need to set a very accurate baseline in your delineated project geography where you will do the distribution. So let's take the example of household water filters again, or community water treatment systems. What is the kind of water source that people had access to before having access to your community system? What kind of boiling behavior do they have? What kind of cook stove do they cook on? What kind of fuel usage do they have? Do they cook on charcoal? Do they cook on wood? What is the time spent that they collect on that firewood, or what is the amount of money they pay to get access to that cooking fuel? You need to do water quality tests of your baseline water source, both bacteriological and chemical. And you need to do water quality tests of your project technology, so your community treatment system, of all community treatment systems. You need to make a database of all the households that get access to the water from your community treatment system. Carbon waiver agreements need to be put in place of all households who are engaged into the project. So they all need to be made aware of the carbon project and void their rights on the carbon credits. A monitoring report needs to be put in place of the water usage, data of the system's operational data, making sure that the systems continue to be functional and continue to be functional in a safe way, providing safe water continuously. Local stakeholder report needs to be put in place based on the local stakeholder meeting and the continuous stakeholder engagement that is relevant. And you need to report on additional SDG impacts, as I mentioned earlier. So what are some things to take into account then, if you want to venture into carbon markets? Scale of the project is very important. A small scale carbon project of 60,000 credits, depending on a lot of different factors, on boiling behavior, on economic situation in the country, what kind of fuel do people cook on, et cetera, et cetera. If you want to fill a project of a small scale under a gold standard, for example, 60,000 credits would amount to about 150,000 people continuously supplied with safe water. Local capacity of project proponent in delivering data is very important. So is a project proponent able to set a good baseline to provide very accurate data on carbon offsets, provide very accurate data on sales of systems, on usage of systems? Then the incentives for continued usage are, of course, extremely important. If you distribute household water treatment, you need to make sure that that treatment systems is being continuously used and that the incentives are correct for using it. And also that you supply replacement parts if they break down, or if you have a community treatment system, that you have that infrastructure in place to do proper operation and maintenance. And then, of course, awareness creation is very important on the importance of safe water, on the carbon project itself, and making sure that people continue to use a technology that is being certified. What are some eligible projects for certification? Community water treatment, household water treatment, briquettes for clean cooking. However, in terms of, from a sanitation perspective, from briquettes from human waste, it is always good to find, as we've seen in practice, to find that combination between then human waste and organic waste from other sources, and then to combine that with improved cook stoves, where you have a very strong case for circularity and for CO2 offsets by combining briquettes with clean cooking. And the briquettes can be from human waste, and it can also be from other organic waste. Compost production, same thing, preventing the emission of methane, which is 28 times stronger greenhouse gas than CO2. And then also making that combination of compost from other organic waste sources as well as human waste, and combining it, for example, with projects that focus on regenerative agriculture and using organic inputs instead of chemical inputs. And of course, biogas production, same thing, finding that combination with biogas from other organic waste and using it for clean cooking as well. Preventing the emissions from methane, also preventing the use of wood or charcoal, and preventing deforestation. So financials, I want to give the big asterisk that financials really depend on a lot of different factors. Sometimes Vera or Gold Standard will need additional reviewing. Vera would charge $50 an hour for this. Sometimes projects take a lot more time to set up. Monitoring can be more expensive, but I can give you a very preliminary overview of what would Vera charge for setting up a carbon project. Opening an account is a $500 fee. Registration fee for a carbon project is 10 cents, capped at $10,000. And then over $10,000, it's 14 cents. So if you have 50,000 credits, it's $6,100. Then your third-party audit, your validation fee, it depends on the project, it depends on the auditor, but $20,000 is a very often seen amount that you can assume for the validation stage of your project. Then your annual fee for verification is $5,000 for one program. 2 programs is $9,000. And then your annual issuance fee for 50,000 credits is $1,000, 2 cents per credit. But it's very important to take into account here the cost for setting up a baseline. You have to hire people. You have to make sure they have access to the right technology. You need to hire a car or a motorcycle to do the baseline. Setting up that local stakeholder meeting and inviting all those stakeholders who are relevant to the project. You need to do continuous water quality monitoring, measuring the uptime of the systems, the carbon waiver agreements, yearly monitoring surveys, etc. So it's always very important to make that budget before and have very clear what the costs are. And of course, this also excludes any cost that a carbon project certifier would take, either on a consultancy basis or a revenue sharing model or a hybrid model. So what would be my tips for the wash sector and for the audience in understanding this space and leveraging the voluntary carbon markets? Find project certifiers who are transparent and who are open about the certification process. Make sure that you express very clearly the mutual expectations and be very clear on your expectations, what you expect specifically in that certification process from a carbon project developer. It's always good to find financing for a feasibility assessment as well, so that a carbon project developer would find the feasibility of the project, both from a technical point of view on scale, as well as organizational capacity, and understanding all the data that you need to deliver, setting up very clearly the business case and all the financials, the cash flows that you can expect, and building that business case based on certification with you if the project is feasible. Make very, very clear agreements on roles and responsibilities. Who is responsible for setting a good baseline? Who is responsible for setting up the local stakeholder meeting and doing that proper stakeholder engagement? Make sure that all the responsibilities are clear from the get-go and agree on how to divide them. And then lastly, share risk and share returns fairly. So for any carbon project, it's important that everyone has skin in the game, that everyone is engaged into the project, and that everyone is motivated to make it into a success. And you need to find a business model that works for both you as an implementing organization, as well as a business model for a carbon project certifier. That can be on a revenue sharing basis or a consultancy basis or a hybrid model. But agree on those financials and make sure you both have skin in the game to make it a success, and be transparent and be open about those expectations. So those are my tips. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thijs, for this really clear, very, very, very good, I think, very good overview of opportunities for using carbon credits in the WASH market. I'm just going to ask if our next speaker could make a few remarks. This is Astrid van Harthofen from Aqua for All, who will say a few words about using carbon credits for sanitation specifically. So Astrid, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Melissa, and thanks for the introduction. I would definitely not call myself a carbon credits expert, but I've been working a bit on this topic as part of my work on climate change within Aqua for All. And as Aqua for All, we have some experience in supporting a few partners on getting carbon credits for water projects. Mainly water kiosk businesses, but also we have been working a bit on carbon credits for filter projects. For sanitation, we don't have any track record on getting that successfully done. And amongst our partners, the WASH enterprises we are working with, we don't have examples. Sorry. But it is a very interesting space that we are following, especially because recently there has been more evidence coming out of the significant methane emissions that are coming from on-site sanitation systems, especially pit latrines and septic tanks where the fecal sludge is digested anaerobically. Now, as Thijs mentioned, there are, of course, sanitation-related things that are already proven methodologies for which carbon credits are being generated. And so that are things on biogas, other waste-to-energy kind of projects, and composting. In most of these cases, the human waste, the fecal sludge, these things can be combined with fecal sludge, but often there is a much larger waste stream, such as organic waste or agricultural waste that's being processed, and a little bit of fecal sludge added to that. With the sanitation work we focus on is really focused on access to sanitation for households, communities, institutions, etc. And I don't think there are any, or not, at least not to my knowledge, projects that are really generating carbon credits fully focused on household sanitation or human waste processing. But it can be added in these kind of projects. Then we are supporting the CBSA, the Container-Based Sanitation Alliance, for doing a study on seeing how whether a methodology can be developed and approved by Verra or the gold standard for container-based sanitation solutions. As container-based sanitation solutions, often dry solutions with quick processing time, they avoid a lot of emissions compared to pit latrines or septic tanks. So that study is now going on, and towards the end of the year, we hope to have results out of that. So that's all I wanted to share on carbon credits for sanitation. Happy to answer some questions.
Astrid. No, this is great. I know there's some people in the audience who have a particular interest in sanitation, so very good that you were able to provide these additional information. Now we're going to move on to our discussants. I have posted in the chat box in case you do have any questions for Thijs, Astrid, or our discussants. Please do write them in the chat box. We'll take them after our discussant's intervention. We're very lucky to have Christelle Quizera, the founder and managing director of Water Access Rwanda, with us. She's going to talk about her organization's experience with carbon credits. She's an award-winning social entrepreneur and activist with a background as a mechanical engineer. She founded Water Access Rwanda with the vision to provide safe water. The company now provides water to 126,000 daily users. This includes borehole-fed water systems and rain-to-tap systems. And she's also pursuing a master's degree in climate change finance and investment. And she's very keen to explore how climate finance can be further mobilized to support her work. Christelle, over to you.
Thank you. Very nice to see many familiar faces. I'll jump right into it and skim over some of the details. We can discuss more in the discussion. But basically, a little bit of brief about Water Access Rwanda. Sorry, one second. This is not in order. But the company has a vision to deliver safe water at the turn of a tap. So we design systems to be affordable, but also convenient for users. I said we're reaching 126,000 users. This number is growing every day. And we have an ambition to be reaching 400,000 users over the next 2 years. So we're kind of in the growing phase of scaling our different initiatives right now. We have 4 different solutions. So we have the borehole-fed water mini-grids that we call Inuma. We have Amazi, which is a rain-to-tap water system. And then we do Hira, which is on-site boreholes. And this is usually for farmers, organizations, agribusinesses, and different people who need a reliable groundwater source. And then we have Voma, which is where we do a lot of the partnerships to finance all our different technologies. And this is where the carbon credit really plays out in terms of subsidizing users and making sure that our technology can reach a larger user base that might not usually afford to pay the cost of water under our different initiatives. We see a lot of impact, but I'm sure that's similar for a lot of people on the call, so I'll skip over this. But talk a little bit about our revenue model. So with Inuma, we raise initial investment and collect usage fees from the users and also charge for a connection for platform access. And that's very cheap for the users, but the initial investment is quite heavy. And we need a model that can recoup investment for our investors. So carbon credits are a key part of that investment, as I touched on. Showing additionality is very important for carbon projects. So what our model shows is that with just user payments, there is kind of a gap in making the project financially attractive. So with carbon credits, we can make it more financially attractive and attract way more investment. With our MAZI system, there's kind of an upfront cost to set up the system, which includes a tank and the filter and first flush diverters from the roof collection. And actually for this one, we've been able to mobilize climate adaptation financing. So one thing I can touch on here is that climate mitigation is where the carbon credits come in.
I think we've lost Christelle. Christelle, if you can hear us, maybe you can remove your camera. And
quite
try.
pricey.
Yeah,
and
okay, you're back.
Oh, was I lost?
Yeah, a little bit. So if you want to remove your camera, we might be able to hear you better. If that's okay with you.
All right.
Sorry.
Yes. Yeah. I think I was just talking about how within the water sector, a lot of projects are more feasible to be financed with climate adaptation finance. And that's something we've been able to secure. And I think that's a further conversation that people on this call might be interested in. But right now, climate mitigation finance, which is where the carbon credits come in, has more money, but climate adaptation is more related to water than the mitigation aspects. All right, so I'll give a short overview of the projects we have in the company right now. So in 2017, we started Water for Climate. We were more of a service provider. So this project has a carbon project developer. It already had a buyer who invested in all of the infrastructure, and it included a mixture of technologies. Under this project, we see between 0.8 to 1.5 tons per user per year. So this is a key number to keep in mind when you're developing the baseline, is to really estimate how much tons you get per user, because it can vary a lot depending on your technology and what baseline you're looking at. In 2020, we registered Enuma Safe Water, and this one is very similar with Water for Climate, but the rules changed. That's the thing to keep in mind with the methodologies. They change often and are updated often. So when you register a project, things might not look the same, even if you're looking at the same kind of communities. So under Enuma Safe Water, we're also able to generate between 0.8 and 1.2 tons, credits per user per year. And then we started a school project last year. It started in 2021, but the carbon project is now happening. And for this one, because students are only at school for 190 days, their consumption of water at school is much lower than community users. For this one, the credits per user per year are quite lower compared to our other projects. So that's between 0.14 and 0.2 tons per user per year. And what we do for all these projects is we do the initial setup, we do ongoing water quality testing, wash trainings, and preventive maintenance. So we visit every system every month, repair what needs to be repaired, and whatever is scheduled to be broken. So we kind of take that preventive approach, which this is important to maximize the uptime of the water system, which affects how much credit you can earn. We also do a lot of monitoring, and we feel like since we started the carbon projects, it's actually enhanced how much we monitor and work with our communities, especially the annual usage monitoring surveys. We do a water consumption field test where we actually track visiting a user every day of the week to see how they use the water, not just how much water they get from our water points, but how they're using it and how much they're using it. So I feel like these were aspects that were enhanced in our monitoring from the carbon project. Now, for people thinking about this or already doing this, there's a few numbers that can really affect your earnings per user. I've heard from a lot of other projects that they're either earning 0.2 tons or 0.4 tons per user. And there's a few ways you can enhance that. One is getting a really good baseline. As Ty mentioned, that's very important because once you register your baseline, it's very hard to update it. And what's very important at baseline is to again, have an accurate measure of what the boiling rates are. So who within your target beneficiary is already boiling water. And if you're implementing in an LDC or in Africa specifically, you have the chance to use suppressed demand. So this is a mechanism that was enacted because the boiling rates in Africa were very low. I think around 33% of the population, but then the majority of the populations were consuming unsafe water. So with suppressed demand, you can make the case that if you ask this through surveys, but you make the case that people who are currently not boiling water would boil if they were purifying their water. And this kind of enhances what percent of your population is directly earning your carbon credits. The other thing to keep in mind is how much is emitted per liter that is consumed. So I've seen baselines really vary, and I'm doing my dissertation in this to see what different projects report. But I've seen, the standard rate is 0.004 tons per liter. And I've seen projects that go as high as 0.8, 0.7, 0.007. So it's like a few factors out. But this can really change how much you earn per user per year, because if they're consuming the same amount of liters, but what you measured as the emission per liter is very low, a project that has a higher emission per liter will still earn more carbon credits than you can earn. And you can enhance this by doing a water boiling test. So you can use standard measures that are provided by the different standards, like use the default values, or you can do your own assessments to actually see how much is emitted. And there is guidelines on how to do this. The other number that really matters is the person days. So these are how many users with how many liters and how many days they had access to your technology. So in the case for the schools, for example, because of holidays and weekends where students are not at school, the person days number is quite low compared to the community where you're assuming a full year access to your technology and that you will keep it working. So last year we had a perfect year where we didn't have any downtime on any of our water points under Water for Climate. And this really enhanced how much credit we were able to report. The other thing is you have to keep the water point safe. So we do water quality monitoring every month. And once you've tested your water quality and it's safe, let's say in January, and you return in February for your other test, and you find that the water point has been contaminated, because you can't prove when the water point was contaminated, you basically lose the period between your last negative test and your current positive test. And it's very important that, which should be standard practice for water providers, but it's very important that when you notice a positive E. coli result, which shows your water is unsafe, that you fix that right away and retest right away so that you don't lose many days in your accounting.
Thank you.
And then the other...
Sorry, Christelle. Yeah, just if you could wrap up quickly, that would be good. We still have another couple of discussions, and I think if everyone on the webinar is okay with this, we will need to extend a little bit the timing of the webinar to allow for Q&A at the end, as we have quite a lot of questions coming through the chat box, and we would still like to hear from John and Guido. Is that okay?
Awesome. Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
the last number is how much liters per day per person. So this can be limited by technology, but there's also an upper limit you can't go over depending on the standard. The last thing I wanted to just touch on very quickly is I'm doing a monitoring of which projects are currently registered in Sub-Saharan Africa on gold standard. And I can share these slides if people want to look at this more. But you can see that a lot of new projects are being listed. If you go by the estimated mitigation outcome, Kenya is quite huge. Nigeria is coming up, in Tanzania and Benin, and Uganda. Uganda and Kenya are quite huge. So East Africa, by the projects on gold standard, has, in terms of size of annual estimated mitigation outcome is quite high. And then by companies, CO2 balance and impact carbon are leading in terms of the both number of active projects, but also the amount of annual estimated mitigation outcome. This is just part of my dissertation, and I hope to produce at the end of it a good mapping that can be useful for other water sector providers to see what's already out there, where the gaps and opportunities are. Thank you.
Super. Thank you so much, Christelle. Sorry to rush you at the end. As I mentioned, I think we will just have to extend the webinar a little bit more than an hour, perhaps an hour and 15 minutes, to allow for everyone's questions to be answered. I'm really happy to introduce our next speaker, John Nyagwensha, who is the CEO of Aqua Kenya, a B Corp certified social enterprise. He leads a team of 30 employees engaged in the promotion and distribution of water, sanitation, and hygiene solutions across East Africa, and he's a former Acumen fellow. So John, over to you. If you could stick to your 5 minutes, that would be wonderful.
Thank you, Melissa. Yeah, and it's a bit of a challenge. Of course, the previous speakers have done so well in capturing a lot of the things that I was going to say. So I'll try not to repeat what they may have covered. But it's a great pleasure to meet everybody and share some of the insights we have from carbon credits. As Melissa said, my name is John Nyagwensha. I'm the CEO of Aqua. We are a social enterprise that is working specifically to improve access to safe water in rural Kenya and across rural East Africa. And the way we do this is mostly through the provision of water filters that are designed for families and schools. And on that premise, then it was interesting for us to look at the opportunity of carbon credits. We started this journey around 2012, and specifically because we were targeting communities that are living on less than $5 a day. There is a big limitation on how much money we can charge and how profitable the business can be. And so we became aware of this revenue stream quite early on and started exploring the possibility of getting carbon credits. But I think because we are quite early on in the scene, we ended up being guinea pigs for Gold Standard as they were developing the methodology, and some of the methodologies that were quite idealistic, but not quite practical. We had to go back and forth to end up with procedures and methodologies that would actually work for a field setting in rural Kenya. And through that, I think Thais did a good job of laying out the timelines that would be expected, and it kind of matches quite well with our experience. But around 2013, I believe we started getting carbon credits, and we just recently finished our 10-year project and have now transitioned into a new 15-year project that is renewable every 5 years, still under Gold Standard. And so the process can be quite lengthy, is what I would say. It does need a lot of investment in time and resources, money, people, to get everything done. But depending on the scale, and the feasibility study will reveal whether the scale is sufficient, it can be a very significant revenue for organizations like our own that are trying to reach people that are earning $5 or less, that need to be reached through a business model where they are paying for these solutions and then have ownership. Some of the benefits that Christelle talked about are things that we've also seen. Beyond the revenue, we've seen very beneficial addition to our monitoring capabilities. The fact that there is an incentive, there's a financial incentive for us to ensure that every filter that we sell is working optimally. The incentive to make sure that we understand what these customers are, where they are located, how they are interacting with these products, I think has been very beneficial. And the data that we collect from there enables us to have additional insights on the customers, which is beneficial for us to improve if it's the product or the processes that we're using, but increasingly to look at those customer relationships as something that we can also use to target them with additional products. The main challenges we've seen, I think, that would be good for us to be aware of, the methodology, as Christelle said, does change up quite a bit. And sometimes the methodology can affect the projections you have. So if you have modeled out how much carbon revenue you're going to generate, it's good to pay attention to some of these methodology changes that are potentially going to reduce both the tonnage and the revenue that is accompanying that. And so that's one of the challenges that we should expect in that. The second one, which perhaps is also from my experience an important caution, is that it's still important for implementers to be involved in understanding how this market works. And from my experience, I think the idea was that we had a consultant that would do the bulk of the work, understanding what the market dynamics were, supporting the report and packaging of our credits. But the challenge sometimes is that if you don't understand, for example, the levers that are important to generate credits, you might actually underperform when there could be some important interventions that in your implementation work could lead to more credits. And for the impact of the people that you're serving, that could also have some benefits. So specifically looking at some of the levers that Christelle talked about, like the amount of water people are consuming per day. If that is not very clear, it's very possible to end up with tonnage at the end of the year that is half what the potential is. But once you understand what the formula is and what the different factors that are involved in generating credits are, it's then necessary and possible for you to design a program or an approach that is going to optimize the performance of your filters, for example, in our case, to generate as many credits as possible, but also additionally deliver the benefits that the customers would really benefit from. And so for us, I think that was a lesson that we learned a bit late, that we needed to have an education program, for example, that accompanies the sales that we are doing to ensure every customer understands the need to keep their filter clean, the need to drink as much water as possible. And that then obviously means more carbon credits for us, but better health outcomes for the people that we serve. The final tip I would have is to look at the partnerships that we develop. It's going to be important, of course, for us to look at this as something that we need support to achieve as implementers. From my experience, it's depending on our scale, it's not going to be possible for you to take on these things in-house. So as we look for partners that we work with, I think it's important for us to consider partners that will really prioritize our projects, because some of them are going to lump you together with much bigger projects that are generating millions of tons. And so you are mixed in there and your project may not be as prioritized. And so I think that will be my final advice, just based on our experience, is that the partnerships we form from here, I think, would be really important to be careful to end up with partners that value the projects that we do beyond just the revenue that they will make from it, to really appreciate the good work that I'm sure many of us are doing on the ground.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John, for these tips and advice you had. I think there's some questions also coming for you in the chat box. I see a lot of people asking lots of questions. Thank you very much. We'll try to address them after our next speaker. I will ask also Guido, our next speaker from Nazava Water Filters. He's the co-founder director of Nazava Water Filters, which is an award-winning social enterprise with operations in Indonesia, Kenya, Ethiopia, and also Ukraine since last year. They empower each household to purify their water at the point of use, and have impacted over 600,000 people in more than 32 different countries. So Guido, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. So I think most has been explained by the previous speakers, so I don't need to add that much. So my name is Guido. I work with one of the founders of Nazava. We make like John household water filters we focus at like poor rural households. We've started in Indonesia in 2009. So with our water filters, you can turn well, tap, rain, or river water into water that's safe to drink. So we first came into contact with this carbon credits already back in 2011, I think, when people from Impact Carbon visited us. I saw them on they're still quite big in Africa right now. So then we in fact started working on it a little bit, but because our volumes were too low, we didn't push it at that time. So then when Impact Carbon, they went through a restructuring when the carbon credits dropped significantly in 2018 or so, I think, when there was a change in the CDM mechanism. And then we started for our Indonesian project, we started working with a member-based organization called Nexus for Development. So they are a carbon developer, but they are membership-based. And they provide companies with loans that you can use to do the carbon development, and then you pay back the loan from the carbon credit revenues. So that's it's a nice way if you're working in Asia. They are a partner I would certainly recommend to have a talk with. And for our Indonesian carbon system, we're now in the final, next year will be our final year, and I think we issued around 50,000 tons. We will issue a little bit more under this project, and then we have to start a new project because we are using a methodology that is non-renewable. And so in Indonesia, because people use less charcoal and less wood to boil water, but they do actually boil their water, not like there's not like the suppressed demand like in like in Africa. But they boil their water often on gas, which makes that the carbon emission reduction per filter is only 1/4 of a ton. So you get 1/4 of a ton per year, which is still like a significant amount of money, because you do like our average sales have been around like $10 per ton through the years. So it's still $3 per filter per year that you can get through the carbon markets. So for us, the carbon funding has been very helpful, especially to help us going through the COVID years, which were like very slow. We couldn't go into the field. We had very low sales, and the carbon credit revenue really helped us that we didn't have to fire that much staff at the time. So it can be, for us, it has always been like a second, just a backup financing, and nice to have, and not a must have. But then it came in very handy during those years. And so I think also if you work like in the violent or in the volatile economy, like many of the countries where we work are, then it's nice to have those carbon credits in case you cannot sell any of your products during a year. So so that's been very good. Now we also expanded to Kenya. First we expanded to Ethiopia. There we registered our carbon project, but we're still finalizing that. It's going a bit slower than expected because mostly the Ethiopian market is just very difficult with many conflicts. There we worked with a third party in a revenue share system, which I am in hindsight not super happy about. So I would really like, before you get into a deal with Thijs now, then really go through the details on how you get money and who is really doing what, especially as Thijs already said himself, to make sure that everybody gets a fair share for their work. But also, like when we signed that contract, the carbon markets were not as hyped as they are now. So one thing I think also is nice to maybe for later on in the discussion, like we've been approached by large companies from the oil and gas sector that like to prepay and pre-fund and buy up all our carbon credits for the coming decades. So it's maybe also interesting if you want to work with that, if you like how much you value your own water impact, and to what extent you would like to be an instrument of those oil and gas companies to greenwash. So that has been a little bit an ethical discussion there. Whether you should just get as much money from those companies and do your good work providing water, or that there's also want to not help those companies showing off their good work. So it's been interesting. So for Kenya, we want to do most of the work ourselves. So we are preparing the documents right now, and we hope to issue in 18 months from now. So that's also very, very exciting. So first it has been very helpful, and I think in the African context, or in the context where people boil a lot on wood and charcoal, there the revenues can be much higher, and so far we haven't been able to subsidize our products with the carbon credits, but we are looking to do that in Africa once we get the carbon credits, to be really able to sell our products at a much lower price point. I think what John is already doing.
Guido, sorry,
right
I'm going to have to stop you there. Thank you very much. I see a
I
lot of
finished.
people. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. I see a lot of people have a lot of questions in the chat. So I'm going to start with some of those questions now. I'm going to lump together some questions from Arnaud, Michael, and Will, who are basically asking, what if the water projects, water and sanitation projects, do not fall into the 5 categories presented by Thijs? What would be the process and the cost of a new methodology certification? And I see a lot of discussion going on. I think perhaps there is a bit of a clarification needed, that not all water projects involve water treatment element to it. And perhaps this is something you can respond to, Thijs.
So this is specifically on the different methodology.
Yeah, exactly. The questions about, what would be the cost and the process of developing a new methodology, how to coordinate to avoid duplication of efforts with others. Some people have quoted in their question, the cost of about 100K to develop new methodology certification. What would be your take on this?
Well, I mean, first of all, you wouldn't create a new methodology simply if you have like a different project technology. If you focus on, for example, household water supply, the existing methodology still applies, and then it's not necessary to make a new methodology. And then secondly, if you want to make minor revisions to an existing methodology, that is entirely possible. So let's say you have an existing methodology under Vera and minor revisions need to be done in order to make it applicable to your project. Then Vera would charge a fee of, I think it's like $6,500 for minor revisions. That would then be applicable to that project. But so many methodologies are available for safe water supply, at least, and so many revisions have been done already, like has been stated before, that creating a new methodology would probably not make that much sense at this point, but a revision of an existing one. Now, this is not the case for sanitation, as Astrid already rightly said.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm also going to ask perhaps, Christelle to respond to the next group of questions, which is about sort of the volume or the minimum number of people or liters of water that would be needed to make the business case for using carbon credit interesting in terms of market. Maybe Christelle, you want to go first, and Thijs or others can complement.
Yeah, I think acceptable is very, very relative. And what's gonna be a key factor to help decide this number is how much you're able to sell the credit for. So I recently learned about a project that was able to get $40 per ton and they're estimating 3 liters of consumption per person. So if you're getting $40 per ton, you can generate very little per user, and you still make a lot of money on that sale. But so it really depends. You have to work out the financial modeling and see what makes sense. What we go for as water access is we agree with traders on an off-take guarantee. So we agree on a minimum price at which they will take whatever credit we generate. And this allows us as a company to focus more on doing our work, providing water, instead of out there trying to sell our credits. And because the minimum price tends to be lower than the $40 I just mentioned, then we're very careful to maximize the issuances per user as much as possible. So in our case, 4 liters would be the minimum acceptable, and we focus on technologies that can deliver that. I mean, we're talking about piped water supply, which we're able to do, but sometimes with filtration where, let's say you provide a filter, but the person loses access to water. So you have days where they were not able to use your filter. This can affect that consumption per person per day. So again, it's gonna be very relative on who you're selling to and what price you can get from them. And this can inform if your issuances are acceptable or not within your financial model. One key thing is the carbon credit should be additional, like it can help your model maybe generate more money, subsidize the users. But I wouldn't recommend just relying on carbon credits for your project. Some people are doing it, and I understand they need to do that instead of charging communities. But in terms of sustainability, at the end of the day, this water has to be paid for by users, and the carbon project maybe can act as a middle ground as you work with your communities, as they rise out of poverty. For the 10 or 15 years you run your project for, the carbon credit can supplement. But I think in the end, it shouldn't replace the user revenues. But yeah, basically short answer, acceptable is very relative. And I'm happy to continue this discussion on this specific project.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think I want to ask also some questions more about water quality. Perhaps I will ask them to John and Guido. So there's a group of questions. So for example, Will ask, how do you achieve the new gold standard methodology of zero coliform at household level? Yeah, depending, because especially for those of you who don't deliver water at household level. And for example, for Aqua Clara and Nazava, what Matthew would like to know, for example, how did you come to have more practical orientation on the ground with regard to water quality monitoring in your discussion with the gold standard? And Michael also asked, what are the detailed elements that need to be tested for water quality? So if it's okay for you, John, I would start with you, perhaps to ask, about your experience in terms of water quality monitoring, what the elements are, how you negotiated this, and how you are achieving the new gold standard methodologies, perhaps, in your work.
Yeah, sure. So first, I think for the water quality requirement, it is 0 E. coli in the water that is being tested, which is the water that people are consuming. And constantly for us, of course, we are distributing in communities where there is no challenge with chemical contamination because our filters cannot deal with that. So for these communities, the biggest challenge is microbial contamination, and the filters that we distribute have to be able to make the water safe by getting rid of any bacterial parasites that may be in the water. And for that, I think there are two main factors that we've seen to be very important. The first one is the technology that we deploy. So the technology has to be able to function consistently, effectively in a field setting. And for us, we had to change technology because of that. We started out with biosand filters, which some of you may be familiar with. And there was a lot of variability because a lot of the performance depended on the user practice. And we had to shift to using membrane filters, which can perform a lot more consistently. under the conditions that our customers are living in. So technology is important, and the way that technology is also designed to ensure that the water, for example, is stored safely. So beyond just the filter producing safe water, that it's actually stored in a way that does not lead to recontamination. So technology, number one. The second one is then user education. So ensuring that every customer understands the need to practice good hygiene in how they handle the water, how they, clean the system. And these are things that I think we can influence to some extent as we distribute, to ensure that there is good training accompanying that the products are well branded, that there is materials like manuals that can provide additional information about the product. So from my experience, I think those are the two things I would say that are important from a water filter standpoint, and they're important to already integrate in whatever model that we have in distribution. But I can let Guido also cover any other gaps that may be there.
Thank you, John. Guido, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, so for the testing, we use the collie plates from a Japanese, the Nissan collie plates. You can test in the field very quickly. So in that way, if you do a lot of testing, it's also easy to see like where if there's any problems with certain water. And yeah, so what I aware is like it's normally zero E. coli, not coliform, because it would be different matter a little bit, because like also the WHO doesn't see coliform as a indicator mechanism. But we test normally also for coliform as well, because it's normally in the same plate. And those plates, they are tested if they are accredited by accrediting organization like the NSF that does accredit laboratory equipment, then you can use those, and it has always been accepted by the gold standard. So in that way, has not been that difficult, but yeah, you need to be sure that your technology is right, or that if you supply water from a borehole, that your borehole is clean, of course.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for this. I want to also ask a question that was posed by Simon about baseline data. So baseline data seems to be key to putting together carbon credits, using carbon credits. What are some of the key indicators common to the baseline data you have used? So this is for Christelle, Guido, and John, perhaps. And are there platforms that people use, ways that they share the kind of baseline data that they've collected for their carbon credit projects? So perhaps, Christelle, you want to go first?
Yes, I think I talked a little bit about, what are key numbers, but the biggest difference is going to be the consumption, what's called the WBY rate in the baseline emission calculation. This is where you can use the default rate that's provided by the standard, or measure your own, which usually when you measure your own, you're trying to get a higher number. So I've seen 0.004 to 0.007 on the higher end. I've heard of 0.008, but not from a project I've analyzed so far. And I'm happy to share the outcome of my dissertation, because this is something I'm also asking. It's not around. And I'm mapping what common numbers are in the baseline. Another number that tends to be very different is the boiling rate at baseline, or what % of the population was already accessing safe water within the community you're serving. These numbers will heavily affect what your baseline is. And you will see some projects you look at and they say 100% of the community was either boiling water or not accessing safe water before we intervened. And I find that to be untrue. It can show kind of a dishonest baseline. But I've also seen usually between 15 and 30% is quite realistic of people who in your community, in your baseline, were already either using a filter already, using chlorine tablets, or going through measures like maybe walking far to access safe water, even if in the project area they didn't have a way to access it. So you will have a certain percentage of users who already through one way or another that doesn't produce emissions, we're already accessing safe water. So again, there is a balance, and there's quite a good paper about this, but there is a very tough balance between project developers who want to maximize the carbon credit earning, and they need to be truthful and care about the environment, which is why these credits exist in the first place. But there's a lot of argument and tension around that. Does it make sense to seek a better baseline, which then can also influence which communities you work in or don't work in? I've seen some people play around with how they do the random selection, which is supposed to be random, but they don't. Maybe they know this community for sure will give me a worse baseline, and they kind of play around with that through a way that might look random, but then it's not really random. So yeah, again, it's gonna vary, and I hope to establish some ranges around this in my research that can really guide future developers to see what looks normal and what's completely off.
Thank you. I think we'd be really interested in seeing some maybe a summary of your research when it's done. So thank you so much for offering. I want to ask also perhaps Guido, there was a question paused about with regards to filter sales generating credit. It is essential to know the details of each household that buys a filter, but that seems to be logistically impossible, especially if bulk sales are made to distribution channels. So perhaps I'll ask that question to Guido, because I see that John has answered it already partially in the chat box. What about your experience?
Yeah, it is always important to have enough data as possible. We in Indonesia had a workaround on it that we could still credit our bulk sales based on our customer database. If we could show that there was our customer database would still be a representative sample of the bulk sales overall.
Okay.
And in that way, we didn't have to have the end user details of all users.
Yep. Okay, super. Super. I also want to point out in the chat box, Alison Parker from Cranfield University has offered to support or to collaborate with organizations interested in using carbon credits for sanitation. You will see her email and a form in the chat box. So feel free to use that if you're interested in working on this. I think we are coming to the end almost of our webinar, the extended end of our webinar. Normally we would have time to do a kind of networking session, but I think in this case we've had so many interesting questions. Probably this will not be the case unless some of you have 10 minutes to spare. But we still want to ask your opinion on this. So I will ask my my colleague Daniela to set up a poll. Please let us know if you'd rather pursue the conversation or if you'd like to have a quick networking session. This would see you paired with other participants in this webinar in small groups of 4 or 5 people, so you can get to know each other before we wrap up. So you should see the poll on your screen now. So please do answer, and then we'll choose. This is a democratic webinar. We will go with whatever the favorite option is. And I see 100%. Oh no. Okay, we'll leave it up for a few more seconds. Perhaps while people are answering the poll, I can perhaps bring another question from Benjamin, who has asked if anyone here has had experience with carbon capture and carbon storage. Thijs, you may want to say a few words about this.
Yeah, as SCF, we actually did a consultancy assignment on it. That was for a VC that also funds direct air carbon capture and storage companies. And with direct air carbon capture, first of all, it's a massively increasing market. It's absolutely crazy how fast this market is developing, and also the prices that are being paid for credits, up to $1,300, $1,500 a ton or more, and 300 to 400 tons per dollars per ton is very common. But I do have to then make the important remark that that is not a certification under gold standard or Verra. It's simply a direct carbon removal purchase where a DAX developer would say, I need $400 a ton to remove X amount of tons from the environment on a yearly basis. And then that investment would be mobilized and the facility would be built and operated.
Awesome. Thank you so
except
much.
for the Climeworks methodology, which is kind of the biggest direct air carbon capture player at the moment.
Great. Thank you so much for clarifying this. Just to say 86% of people want to continue with the Q&A in plenary. So we will continue briefly and we will close in a few minutes. I just want to ask Christelle, this didn't come through in the chat box, but she did mention in her presentation using climate adaptation finance. And I wondered if she could quickly talk to us about this before we wrap up.
Yes. So in the case of Rwanda, the climate adaptation finance has focused a lot on stopping runoffs and increasing the resilience of water infrastructure. And usually this comes through as grant money to subsidize projects. For agriculture, it's pretty straightforward. If you allow people to irrigate, they're more resilient to the climate. So it can come through as either additional investment on your existing infrastructure to make it more climate resilient. And I find that it's quite generous, that it can be a good source of investment, which usually comes through as grant money or very low costed debt or other financing mechanism. For household level, we've been successful at mobilizing finance to install water tanks as a way to, again, improve that climate resilience, reduce runoff, and as a consequence, reduce erosion, which in Rwanda is very relevant, and in quite a few African countries, which are going to see increased and erratic rainfall patterns over the coming few years. So there is some middle ground where you can apply this for a water supply project by either improving how you design it or how it's going to affect people's ability to adapt to climate change within whatever context you're in. There's been also funding to, for example, increase the depth of boreholes as aquifers get, like the water level in aquifers lowers. So there's all kinds of projects you can design and be able to attract this money. But in our case, it's been more about mobilizing direct household subsidy for them to obtain better technologies like tanks, and then for farmers to be able to irrigate. And this is usually 50% of the cost, which slashes the cost down quite a lot. And the next step is to provide paying in installments. So instead of charging the full cost upfront, being able to get some working capital financed at a very low cost, so that you can offer like 36-month payment plans, which really bring down the cost to almost nothing. I mean, not nothing, but a number that can be affordable for people living, below $5 per day.
Thank you so much for clarifying. I think I'm going to ask our colleagues from Aqua for All, Luce, if you could please wrap up this webinar. It's been really excellent. I think we have had a lot of interest. We will share all the material from the webinar after the session, as well as the recording. In the slides, you will find out also the contact details of some of the speakers, so you can also follow up with them if you have questions that we weren't able to cover entirely. Please do follow up with them. We, as RWSN, will also have a second session on this topic, focused on our African, European, and American audience. This was too early for some of our colleagues in the US. And in LAC. So we hope some of you can also join us for this session if you want to hear more about this. Luce, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you everybody for joining this session. I hope it has been a fruitful session for everyone, and that you have learned more about the carbon credits. But also, first of all, thank you, Thijs, Christelle, Guido, and John, for sharing on your experience and answering the questions of the participants. Yeah, so like Melissa also shared, we will be sending everybody the additional resources, including the presentation. I'm sharing with you the slides of this session again in the chat, and feel free to add your details at the end, so you can communicate with each other, network, and that. Yeah, and if there are any questions, feel free to reach out to us, RWSN, I assume, and all our speakers.
And yeah, thank you to all our speakers. Thank you, Christelle, Guido, Thijs, John, and Astrid as well.
Oh yeah, Astrid, sorry.
Thank you all. Take care. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye.